One example, we've been working in a supply chain here and helping manage a supply chain here in Texas, and we started it in 2022, sorry. At that stage, with the first 4 months of processing, we were doing 5% prime, 16% select. In just 2 years, our average for the last 6 months has been 21% prime and 5% select. Better genetic selection, better animal health. We've also reduced the age to slaughter by about 1.5 months. So that's better gains, better growth rates, better conversions. So, could have we done that in 2 years in the past? Probably not. That's the really exciting part for me.
Hey, I'm Shaye Wanner, and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Whether you're a seasoned rancher or just curious about the cattle world, this podcast dives into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future of ranching. Let's get started and keep your herd ahead of the herd. Folks, today we are visiting with Ian and Suzy Wheal, who are the couple and minds behind Breedr, which is my favorite ranch management program. While we touch on the app and data collection throughout this conversation, we are really focused on how ranchers can use data to be price makers instead of price takers. So Ian and Suzy talk about how ranchers are able to pass individual animal data throughout the supply chain and ultimately bring that data all the way back to the ranch level so they can use it to make better management decisions. We also talk about building relationships with feeders and packers, and if feedlots and packers truly want to be a part of sharing this data back with the producer. So it's a really insightful conversation and a really exciting one, if you ask me. So remember, if you have suggestions about how to improve this podcast, or if there's a topic you want to hear or guest you'd like to hear, send me an email on my website and I will include it in my notes. With that, let's talk with Ian and Suzy. All right. Well, Ian and Suzy, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Ian, thank you for coming back on the show, and Suzy, welcome to the podcast. For those of you who have listened before, you will remember Ian from an episode we also did with Nick Jorgensen, and where we talked about Breedr and some beef supply chain stuff. And we are going to kind of talk about some of that same stuff today, but in a little more detail, and talk about a few other things related to that topic as well. So, to get started, Ian and Suzy, the question I am asking everyone lately is, why do you place your bet on the beef industry?
Well, thanks, Shay, and great to be back. It's good to see you again. So, look, for me, I grew up in the beef industry. It's, they say it's in your blood. It's definitely in your blood. So that's an element of it. I think Suze didn't grow up, so she might have a different opinion. But I think the exciting thing for me is producers and the people within this industry. There's a long history, there's a lot of grit, there's a lot of determination, there's a lot of people who really do want to do the best for the environment, for their families, for some of the things that we hold dear to our heart in terms of everything we do. And the exciting thing is it's an industry that's in change. There's a lot of things that are happening that means that over the next 3 to 10 years, beef is growing. There's an excitement around beef again. We've seen nutrition being a bigger factor. There's lots of different beef products now, everything from natural to Wagyu to prime to choice. We have this whole market that's developing, and that's why that's exciting for producers is how do we grab hold of it? And I think with data and with technology coming in, my belief is how do I help producers embrace the future? And I think we've been pioneers for centuries in the ranching world, and how can we be pioneers again when we're coming into data? And I've been lucky enough to have some of that experience, and how do I bring that back to the beef industry is just really powerful for me.
That's very powerful. Suzy, why do you bet on the beef industry? Especially if you didn't grow up in it. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I didn't grow up in it, but I have now been quite immersed in it for some time, especially as Ian's parents are ranchers and Ian's brother is a rancher. And a lot of our conversations as families is about cattle. So our children are, also immersed in it as well. I think I come at this from probably more of an average consumer perspective. So when I go and look at buying meat, and I care about the resources that we're using as the planet, and I care about the choices that I make and within our family. I think the really exciting for me is seeing firsthand how if we can put data into the hands of producers, that is the fastest way and the most efficient way of producing more better meat from less resources. We'll talk a little bit about some of the results that we're getting, but seeing how we can make that shift and have sustainability and reduce carbon as almost a byproduct of what we're doing, that for me is kind of one of the real motivating reasons to be in it, and why I think it's a really exciting time for the beef industry.
That's very interesting. And you both kind of alluded to a little bit about what we're going to talk about today and what you've been doing with Breedr. But before we dive into some of that, because I'm sure some of that will come up later in the conversation as well, one of the things we always talk about anytime I'm on the phone with either one of you is kind of that more traditional linear industry model versus this loop or full circle beef model. So can you touch on why you see a loop system or that full circle system really being the future of the beef industry for producers who want to stay ahead of the bell curve and at the top of their game?
Yeah, I think, look, for me, having grown up in the beef industry, when we are producing our cattle, we would mostly get ours to yearlings, and we would send them off, and we'd never know how did they feed, how did they grade, what happened to those cattle. And so when we then came to make culling decisions and breeding decisions and looking for bulls, we never got any data, and we never were able to improve fast enough. And I think that sort of linear approach to cattle industry, where we make our decisions, we sell them with no understanding of what happens. People will say it takes 10 years to improve our genetics, and that in an industry that's changing with the pressures we have from a commercial perspective, a profitability perspective, a sustainability perspective, like even just a legacy perspective, we need to move faster, and we want to move faster, and there's opportunity now like there's never been to move faster. And I think that's where we came up with Full Circle Beef, and that really is about that data flow. And from your perspective, Suze, do you know?
Yeah, so I think in the traditional model, if you think about buckets, this is how I always think about it. You have your buckets, and each person is doing their own role within their own bucket. So you have your seed stock producer, who then passes the genetics onto the cow calf goes onto the backgrounder onto the feed yard, and then onto the packer, and then ultimately to the consumer. And the cattle move, but the learnings that you have within your organization, they stay within your organization, and the information about the cattle stays within the organization. So you have very little transparency over what's going through. You have very little understanding of what's coming, and then what is going on in the next stages. So the learning opportunity is sort of being cut off at the knees at each time these cattle move on to the next place. I kind of think of it as like baking a cake, and everybody's doing their little bits of it, but nobody gets to taste the cake, and nobody knows how it rose. But every time you're trying to improve your own thing, but you're not getting that kind of basic feedback about what you're doing. So then what we're trying to do is take those buckets and make them into like a fountain and a circle. So the cattle move, and the information about the cattle moves with it, to help everybody manage those cattle in a way that reflects the differences in the cattle, and then the learnings come back to everybody.
I think it's on a practical level, what it means is if you're a seed stock producer, you're producing bulls, you sell them to the cow calf, you never get progeny data. Like some of the breed associations would say they've only got a few thousand progeny data on some of these bulls that they're building EPDs for. So how do we now get them tens and 20 and hundreds of thousands of data on the sire lines that are being developed? Well, you can only do that with feedback loops, and being able to work with the cow calf operation, who can now try and cull his cows, not just on the phenotypes, which we all do, but also can cull his cows on carcass data he's got back on that, on how they fed through the feed yard in terms of individual growth rates of those cattle through the feed yard. So knowing the calf that came from that cow, but then knowing, did that grow in the feed yard? Because little changes at a cow-calf operation in terms of genetics, health, vaccinations can have an exponential impact on how they grade or how that performs in the feed yard. And I think that ability to feed that information back to the cow-calf and seed stock really lets them build better calves, and at the end of the day get the value they deserve for those cattle, because we already have people that are paying $5 a hundredweight more for cattle where they know those cattle are going to perform once they hit the feed yard, and so that's real money, for a cow-calf producer.
I think it's also about this idea of mutual gain. So if one stage in that process is improving, you would benefit from the stage that's improving, not only if it's improving before you, but after you. So, better weaning weights, higher health scores, improved carcass quality, all of these benefits, it's shared progress. And then that success doesn't just lift the feed yard at the end, it lifts everybody across the chain, because the feed yard will want to come and buy more cattle from you. Everybody's connected because you are the ones that are helping them produce that really consistent high quality of beef.
I like that idea, what you said, Suzy, of mutual gain. Now, and Ian, you touched on some of the advantages that people will see. You gave that great example about how producers can cull better for cows that are actually performing with some of this data. But when you look at some of the producers that you've worked with, whether that's in the UK or if that's in America, wherever they're at, what is one of the first advantages they see on the ranch level once they adopt this full circle mindset?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you can't change what you can't measure. And so, so much of it's guesswork otherwise. So to be honest, if we go really back down to the basics in terms of capturing the data and measuring that data that goes through, firstly, it's usually time. Bits of pen and paper that are in a notebook that get lost or have a propensity to get lost, and not actually understanding how individual animals are performing, because people are amazing, they can hold a lot in their head. But when it comes to actually really analyzing and getting feedback on what cattle are doing the best, and the time saving of capturing that data, that's the first step. The next step is, really on a weaning weight and also on a grading performance. So, which genetics are they using? And that genetics can be either cow culling and cow selection for breeding, for your replacements, or it can be just which size should you go back and buy next year. Quite often you're buying from multiple different seed stock producers, which ones are helping you produce the best cattle. And
that for me has always been the most exciting thing. It's just that sire report, because that is something that people who've been collecting information about they've been collecting information about their cattle for a while, you can just plug that information straight in, and within an hour or so, you can give somebody the knowledge that these sires produce calves that grow X% faster than the rest of everything else you've produced. So that we had one producer, and he was saying this is going to be worth like 150 pounds in the UK to him per calf, just that little bit of information.
Yeah, and what was interesting is his commercial bull was actually producing calves with higher weaning weights than the one he'd just bought last year. And just because, and they also, he started measuring through genomics, which ones, how many they produced. It was also producing 60% of the calves, where the other one was only at 30% of the calves for that lot. So it's just really interesting. But again, if you didn't know that, you couldn't do anything for it. And make those changes. So, and with the feed yards we work for, they are already actively looking at where they source better cattle from. Cattle are really expensive right now. So if you're going to be spending money on cattle, you want to be working with the people who have the best health protocols and are producing cattle that are going to grow once they hit the feed yard and will grade once they hit the packing plant. So, that is happening. And the higher the prices of cattle get, which is only going to increase more, the more people are going to care about this sort of information to be able to make better decisions. And so I think now's a great time. It means we can earn more for our cattle, but also it's going to help, that shared benefit that Suzy's talking about is going to be huge.
There's also a real story about consistency. one of the things that we talk about a lot is how the bottom 20% of your herd will be eating the profit from the top 20% of your herd. So your bottom performers are really doing you a disservice, and part of the like the low-hanging fruit is just identifying which are the cows that are, you know, not serving you, which are the sires that perhaps you wouldn't want to be using again, and just taking those out of your herd. Yeah. And then that can lift everything up, you know, radically.
Yeah, to give you, I mean, just practically, you know, the cow that produces you a calf every year, you know, most cow-calf operations, like, that's my best cow. She gives me a calf every year. Now, what if that calf weans 100 pounds lighter than every other calf that you've got? Is it really still your best cow in the herd? Like, you add that up over a 4-year period, there's another extra calf, right? So, you know, those sort of things are really, really important to be able to measure. And I think that basic measurement is not complicated. You know, being able to do that can have a real impact.
So when you look at producers joining a supply chain, which is essentially what this full circle mindset or loop system that we're talking about, do you see that being more advantageous for producers of certain sizes, or do you think it's something that in the long run is going to be advantageous for cattlemen of all sizes, as long as they have the mindset of, I want to produce, or I want to improve my herd and get as much data back as possible to do that?
Yeah, look, culture's huge, but I'd have to say it is a supply chain, but it is slightly different. Like, a lot of supply chains up until now have been right, sign this affidavit for me, sign information for me, pass it along the chain, but never get that feedback of, like, where are my cattle good? And I think that's where we are thinking differently. It's like, this is a collaborative industry. How do we collaborate? How do we actually help everyone? And that's where full circle is different. There's supply chains in the industry. Don't get me wrong. People exist. There is supply chains. But are they giving the cow-calf guy their carcass data with genetic sire information to tell them which sires are the best? Not always. In fact, mostly not. And I think that's the exciting thing about the collaboration. To lift everyone, you have to do that feedback. But you're right, the cultural side of things, our vision is we can help everyone. And, you know, help every rancher become bigger. So there's no doubt we focus on people. We don't focus on big, but we focus on people who want to change or want to get bigger or want to be better and want to build profit. And, you know, we'll work with everyone from 20 cows through to, you know, I think 100,000 is our largest. So
I think also there is there's, you know, definitely there's a mindset that just because you're smaller doesn't mean that you can't be progressive and, you know, really take these learnings on. We had a calf rearer in the UK who he started with 20 calves, but he really got understood how it worked, and he got really into checking the, you know, how every calf was growing and the individual mindset. And within 2 years, he had, really expanded in size. I think the other thing is that now there's definitely a shift in that I think earlier on we talked about how, you know, it's not hard to capture the data. I think we're saying that from our perspective because we have an app that we've spent 6 years developing and testing, and we've made it so much easier and so much faster. But I think lots of people's experience of trying to capture this data has not been easy, and it has taken more time, and it feels like you're, you know, jumping through hoops when you have, you know, so many other things going on. So I think that's the change, hopefully now for people, is that you should find it faster than pen and paper, and it's easier than pen and paper, and it's more accurate than pen and paper. And then you can start, you know, learning all of the advantages to using it and all of the day-to-day, you know, how it makes your day-to-day life easier. And then that is, once you start getting into it, that's when you'll really start getting the benefits.
Yeah, definitely makes the life easier for the person in the office who gets dumped with a rained on piece of paper at the end of the day and says, can you write this into Excel for me? So, you know, that mindset, and how do we get people engaged with it and immediate feedback. And, you know, if you've done an EPDs on your bulls and you've got EPDs in your bull, how do you look them up when you're in the field and you're out there in the pastures looking at the cattle? Like that, having stuff at your fingertips to make decisions. It's no good if it's in the chute and you can't leave an animal in the chute for over a minute, really. Like you want to get it in and out. If you've got to go check something, you want it in front of you. You need to make those decisions. We don't touch these animals very often, so everything needs to be at your fingertips.
And especially with calving season coming up, I think that's that's one of the key times when you can really make progress, both in terms of capturing that data really easily, but also having the data there for the rest of the breeding season, so that you can then get that information in and start looking at your KPIs and really doing that line in the sand of like, where are we now, and then where do we want to get to and how are we going to get there, and it really starts at calving, I would say.
Yeah. I would agree, and the app that you guys have created is just the start of what you guys have available. But as an app user myself, for we're almost coming up on a year, I think, of me being signed on with our operation, it does save a lot of time, and the ability to, if you're out in the pasture in the summer and there's a lame cow or calf, and to check, okay, did I treat them? What did I treat them with? How much? And it's all right there, even to set up alerts if something needs a second treatment. And that's just the very basic level. There's a lot of ways to use that. Now, Suzy, you brought up
our oldest user is something like 98. So this is an app for everybody. This is not an app for young kids coming home from college. This is an app for everybody.
Yeah, although we did have one rancher that we worked with, and he came to us and he's like, I love your app. And I'm like, why is that? He's like, well, my son would have never got into cattle if there wasn't an app for it. So I've now got him into cattle. So it's all good.
Ease of use and attractive to the younger generation. That's a win-win. So, Suzy, you brought up that, sometimes in the past, people maybe have a little bit of a sour taste for collecting some of this additional data because it's been time-consuming. Do you think that has been the main holdup for people adopting this mindset of passing information throughout the whole supply chain? Or do you think there's been something else slowing people down from adopting that mindset and really trying to get into it?
So I think the first wave is people collecting their data on their own, in their own operations, and using it to improve their own operations. I think that is something that is very much underway, and I think people are, if they're not yet moving that way, they sort of know that is the direction that they should be going in, and actively looking at how to start doing that. I think part of the idea of sharing data, that is something that probably doesn't feel very natural, because I imagine that that isn't necessarily something that has been used. What's the word?
I mean, it's saying there has been a fear of people stealing their data, because there has been people who have done that in the past and taken this data and used it against the producer. And I think there is definitely a fear of that. But what I'd say is, that data has already been shared. When you create a sale listing for those cattle, there's a lot of data on that sale listing that people are getting, but you're not then getting the benefit of getting data back on those cattle. And I think, again, the data's already there. If they're already then individually weighing those cattle as they hit the feed yard. So they'll have more data on that rancher than that rancher has on his own cattle, who may have just weighed them by putting them over a weigh scale in bulk. So, how do we put the data in the hands of the ranchers so they have as much data as the people who are buying those cattle? I think, it's the
sort of analogy of, would you sell a second-hand car without any of the data about the mileage and the, and how many services it's had? If you're selling your cattle without that information, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And the other key thing here is that if you are not capturing that information about your cattle, the next person along most likely is. So they will be understanding how your cattle grade, how your the feed conversion as they come through. So then they may know that you actually produce brilliant cattle, But they're getting your calves for the same price as they are somebody else down the road who isn't producing such great calves. So you really want to know. You want to know as much as everybody else does about your cattle, if not more.
Yeah.
And I think in the past, people have always wanted, if you've had to share information in the past, it's always been for somebody else's benefit. This, in our scenario, this is for mutual benefit, and this is within a tight-knit, connected chain circle where everybody is improving collectively and lifting everybody else up.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, and I think that is a definitely it might be a nuance, but it's a huge mindset shift, right? Is that there is benefit to collecting data, sharing data, and getting data back. That means you can do more things than you've ever done as a cattle producer and become profitable quicker. I think the only other thing I'd add when it comes to like this difference between like the fear of, I suppose, collecting data and everything else is, quite often it is when you're at the shoot. It's you're at the shoot, you're trying to vaccinate, preg check, trim hooves. There's just so many things you're trying to do there, and the thought of writing down things at the time and like getting out a pen and paper, writing it down, getting the number right, and then or it's sitting on a box that you might have there that never goes into a database. Then you've got to do an Excel spreadsheet, and someone with Excel skills has got to do VLOOKUPs and like really complicated stuff for a producer who may not have ever used Excel a lot, but some are very good at Excel, don't get me wrong. How do we make that easy? And I think that's what we've really focused on, is like having it at the shoot. The data capture just happens. It makes it more calm at the shoot, not more stressful at the shoot, because that is the highest stress point we have. And I think that demystifies data and provides benefit back when you're making those decisions. But yeah, look, data is important. You have to measure what you manage or manage what you measure. So you can from there.
So do all segments of the industry really want to participate in getting that data back to the producer? Because there's also the mindset. I mean, Suzy, you brought up the point that, you want to know if your calves are performing higher than maybe the neighbor down the road, but you're getting the same price. You want to be able to almost in a sense negotiate and say, my calves are worth more. But if other segments have that data, do they want to share it? So I'm just curious, how receptive are all sectors of the industry to creating this full feedback loop that we're talking about today?
Yeah, I think it's, this comes back to building a coalition of the willing and, people who are wanting to do this and see it as benefit. Certainly the people we're working with are. Now there's nuances to that, like, there is a fear from feed yarders, oh, you'll get my carcass grading and you'll just go to the next feed yard and ask for a higher price. That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is build a long-term relationship. So not only do we give that data back, but we'll give that data back with culling recommendations, with sire choice recommendations, so that next year those cattle are even better again. And knowing who the feed yard is that they go to, knowing that there's a relationship there, if you then suddenly pick up that data and just try and auction it off to the next highest bidder, you're going to miss out the year after on did those cattle do well. And you're going to miss out on data and you'll be out of the chain. And there's a benefit to this like continuous improvement. We all know ranching, it doesn't get better in a day. Like it takes years to get better, and so you have to have a few calf crops to be able to iterate on, and that's what we're really trying to do here, is build with those people.
I think the really exciting thing is seeing how quickly we are making improvements and how quickly we're seeing really measurable gains when we start connecting up producers and we start using the information and everybody is trying to improve together collectively. So that's the do you want to talk about some of the key
Well, I mean, one example, we've been working a supply chain here and helping manage a supply chain here in Texas, and we started it in 2022, sorry. At that stage, with the first 4 months of processing, we were doing 5% prime, 16% select. In just 2 years, our average for the last 6 months has been 21% prime and 5% select. Better genetic selection, better animal health. We've also reduced the age to slaughter by about 1.5 months. So that's better gains, better growth rates, better conversions. So, you know, could have we done that in 2 years in the past? Probably not. Like, you know, that's the really exciting part for me.
Yeah, and I think it takes that collaboration, because as soon as you cut that chain, you can't achieve those goals. You can't get from 5% to 21% unless you're working together. And so that is, I think before everybody's been trying to take their own little bit of margin, but actually by working together, you improve the margin so much that it is, that like the results are so extraordinary that it is in everybody's interest to keep tight in this chain. And I think if you are also if you are starting to, if before you get into one of these full circle beef chains, if you start using the app and you start collecting this information about your cattle, that puts you in such a strong position, because you can prove the value of your cattle, and then you can go out there and you can start, you know, you're in a really strong position when you might want to go and approach, say, a Wagyu program or a certified Angus program, because you can go out there with the confidence to say, you know, I know what my cattle are doing, I know what they're worth, I can show you how consistent they are, and they're only getting more and more consistent.
Also, like, we spend a lot of time talking to retailers. The number one thing they're asking for is obviously high quality beef with consistency and security of supply. But after that, what they're looking for in producers is continuous improvement. So they're looking for people who are wanting to get better, wanting to be part of something, wanting to, and you don't have to be perfect now. It's about, you know, how do we show where we are here, and in 4 years, 5 years, how every year are we just getting a little bit better? And, you know, given the beef industry, that is what we have to do anyway.
So usually there's risk associated with everything. What would be the risk for ranchers who join a system such as this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, the risks that go with it is, you know, we try and diminish the risks as much as possible. Like, people don't have to sell their cattle at the end of the day. They can make choices of where those cattle go. It's, you know, we're independent as ranchers to make those decisions. Obviously, there's benefits to join a full circle program like we're talking about. You know, I think the big risk to them is, like, I see most of the risk about sitting on the ranch with the people that they have in their team, with the people they're working with, and there's a risk of, maybe as the rancher you're wanting to do it, and you think it's a great idea, but do you have that same mindset with your cowboys and the workers and everything on here, is that, you know, that works on the ranch? You know, there is a cultural change element that goes with this, and that is, like, whether it's your father-in-law, whether it's not your father-in-law, like, you know, what is it that you want to be able to do on that ranch to be able to implement this? I think having everyone in the team behind continuous improvement on the ranch and continually getting better is just probably the biggest risk you want to take away. And otherwise, one person can block progress. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, you've really got to get those aha moments. Like, you know, everybody has their different expertise. But I think once you start, you know, capturing the data and getting, you know, starting to do that, that is definitely a learning curve and a cultural change. But then I think once you can start seeing the results and the insights that come off the back of that, and people can start making these decisions that have, you know, with not just the knowledge from experience, but also knowledge from the data as well. Like, when you put those two together, that's sort of an unstoppable force, I think.
Yeah, and, you know, they're just getting started, right? Like, getting over the hump of first using technology or first capturing data. I remember when I was setting this up and my mum called me, she goes, "You better have a phone number, because all these other tech companies without a phone number." So since that day, we've had a phone number on our website, someone who answers the phone, like, whenever you need it in the pressure. Like, you know, she was the typical person sitting at home going, I'm trying to do work, and these tech companies have given me a chatbot that's going to respond to me and not get back to me. And it's like,
And not give you the article that actually helps.
Exactly. And so it's like, put the phone number front and center. We have a whole team here in Texas who is literally, they're there to help, right? Like, and it's a people business that we work in. So I think, you know, we do what we can to de-risk it, but, you know, it's not for everyone. People have their own ways of operating, and, you know, we see the benefits of this. We really hope we can support ranchers and work with people, and we also understand people have different ways of running their businesses and want to do it differently. But, the retailers, the consumers, they're asking for this visibility. They are paying more for beef, which comes through with consistency and quality. Like, that's a fact. With a lot of the grids that we're working with now, it's sort of $5 to $8 over the market every time because of the quality of the cattle, and the packers are loving it because they're getting a better product that they can sell for more, and then the retailers loving it because they're getting a more consistent product that drives footfall. It's not only everyone in the ranching benefit, but our customers, being the packers and the retailers and consumers, are also benefiting from this.
You mentioned.
I was just going to add in, I work in the marketing team, and so from our side of things, one of the real, the really lovely things to see is that 95% of people who sign up for the Breedr app renew each year. So, that's unheard of in any company I've ever worked in. And so that kind of really talks, like, as a testament to how easy we've managed to make the app.
Yeah, and 30% of them are, I love Lillian, she's amazing, right?
Yeah,
she's amazing. You have a good one with her.
Yeah. I mean, we have people saying, Lillian phones me, not because I've got a problem, but just to check in and see how I'm doing with the app.
So, you mentioned it's not for everyone, but who is it for?
I think it's back to that growth mindset, both to that, I want to be better every year. So if you're a producer that wants to be better every year and you're wanting to understand the data to be better every year, like, that's who it's for. And, we hope that's everyone. But certainly, tradition plays a big role in this industry, and there's no doubt tradition can be a blocker to this industry sometimes. And, sometimes you've got another job and you have 20 head ranch and you do it for the joy of it. You don't necessarily do it because you want to get your 10 pounds extra weaning weight next year. You do it because you want to kill one of those animals for your personal consumption. So, it's not for everyone, but if you're wanting to be, we hope that's for anyone who wants to be a cattle producer. They want to be a cattleman. They want to be growing their herd. They want to be becoming more productive. They want to produce better beef. That's who we're targeting. There's no doubt about that. And that's what's closest to my heart. That's what my dad instilled into me is every year get a bit better and learn from your mistakes. What did he say? You can always make a mistake, just don't make the same one twice. And it's those sort of, that culture is how do you learn and how do you get better?
I think there's also something about this, the speed of technological change is getting faster and faster and faster, and especially in the beef industry, embryo transfer, genetics, genomics, these things are changing so fast, and with artificial intelligence layered over the top, it's just going to get faster and faster and faster. So I would say that something like a full circle beef program is for people who don't want to get left behind, because there will be this productivity gap of the producers that are using data to improve and the producers that are not. And then there'll be a second level of productivity gap about the producers that are connecting and getting shared momentum and, exponential gains from a connected system. And those, that group will go even faster. So I guess it's where you want to be on the spectrum.
So, with as exciting as all of this is, and with as much opportunity as there is for beef producers who have this mindset, where can they go to get started or learn more and just put things into motion?
Yep, perfect. Well, go to our website for sure. So we're breedr.co, not M, but co, so breedr.co. But, chat to us, get in touch. We've got teams around the country, everywhere from Idaho to Kansas to South Dakota. So give us a call. One of our team can chat with you and go from there. So.
And if you are interested in the full circle beef model, that is something that will work really closely with you, regardless of where you are in your, in the data capture journey. Coming in January, we have an initiative with American Cattlemen, who we've partnered with. They have a very similar aspiration to us to empower producers, American producers, and develop a culture of continual improvement, and so we are going to be working with them to try and roll out a way of demystifying all of the very, sometimes complex elements of the industry.
Watch this space. It's coming.
Watch this space, and sign up for our newsletter if you want to hear more at Breedr.
All right. Well, we love empowering ranchers to be price makers and not price takers. So thank you for joining me on the show today. For anyone out there listening, I will make sure to have the Breedr website and social media handles in the show notes so you can find more information there. Like we talked about, they have a great customer support team. You can talk to real people. So that's another great option too, where you can connect with them on their website. But with that, thanks for tuning in, and happy ranching, folks.
Thanks, Shaye.
Thank you.